Greetings! It is I, Tantus Naraban Dracovin, Lord and Emperor of the Dracovin Empire, and welcome. It is time to continue my discussion on the races of Pathfinder, the role-playing game system. And I'm not just talking about the usual races, your humans, your dwarves, your elves, but the unusual ones that if you are playing in the Pathfinder role-playing game system, you can play. You have the option of playing it. So today for you, I have the Tengu. Now, the Tengu are a very interesting race, as they're often stereotypically looked at as kind of thieves and scoundrels, and unfortunately, circumstances drives them to become thieves and scoundrels very often. Their very nature kind of puts them in that direction. They are quite covetous, often pushed on by greed. They will easily be swayed by flattery, but they are very kind of cunning and deceptive, always willing to take advantage of any circumstance they are put in, regardless of who that is hurting, even their own kin. They're quite rash, and oftentimes that leads them to get into their competitive nature. Now, there is some arguments whether all of this together is natural behavior for a Tengu. Some of them feel that it is something that's just deep in their nature. Others believe it's the circumstances of their own existence, that the cultures around them that have forced their culture itself to evolve has driven them into this circumstance where cultural biases cause them to be like this. The thing is, Tengu are not what but survivalists. They know how to survive. Whether it takes the form of being a pickpocket or a thief in a big urban city environment, or if they're out in nature being a hunter-gatherer. Regardless, they find their ways to survive. Many races, from humans to giants, have tried to basically either make them their servants or enslave them. So the Tengu have had a history of being oppressed by other races. Those that basically survived the oppression found themselves scavenging around in cities or hiding in those deep wilds where they would become the hunter-gatherers. So the evolution of their race has been driven by this push to the fringes, and not having a lot of the same luxuries most other races enjoy in the current world status. These descendants of those that managed to survive now have to face oftentimes stereotypes. That the idea of a Tengu is oftentimes that, scoundrel and a thief, and they either have to fight against that, or the circumstances they're in forces them to embrace that very stereotype in order to survive. Neither position do they really enjoy, but that's where they're set at. That's where they're stuck at. It's a harsh world out there, and the Tengu are stuck right in the middle of it. So when you should look at a Tengu, they are technically about as tall as a human, but they are bipedal, crow-like people. They have the features very similar to that of a crow. They have a very broad beak, and their hands and feet have talons on them. They're also covered in feathers. Now, they're unable to fly with these feathers, but these iridescent feathers are oftentimes colored black, brown, sometimes kind of dark blue. So, very crow-like colors. Now, one of the problems with Tengu is that their skin, their talons, and their beaks, even their eyes, are oftentimes very similar color to their feathers. So this means other humanoids have trouble telling them apart. A Tengu that wishes to be identified will find ways, either do paintings or maybe items connected to their beaks, onto their talons. Certain feathers will be painted. Various little things that they can do to distinguish themselves from another Tengu. They will do that, just not for their own sakes, because they can tell each other apart, but for all the other humanoids they interact with. Tengu are technically just about as tall as humans, but they kind of hunch over when they walk, so they don't. It always looks like they're a little smaller than a human, and their eyes are kind of recessed into their heads, almost like an avian's or predators, giving them kind of a panoramic view. They have binocular vision, and an important note here is that they are indeed an avian. Bones are hollow. They lay eggs. Now, Tengu do live in close-knit communities, whether this is in the form of an urban center, which they tend to look to some kind of communal slum, or isolated communities out in nature. They remain secluded, secretive either way. They kind of keep their culture under wraps mostly, which if you would look at their culture, it's a combination of their age-old traditions and traditions that have been picked up by the kind of newer cultures they've encountered, the culturals around them. So you'll find if you could actually analyze Tengu culture, it does have that breed of old, plus whatever else is around them they've seemed to pick up just a little bit of to create their own new thing. And this works with languages too. You'll find that Tengu will pick up bits of regional dialects around them and add that to their own kind of language that they're speaking. Tengu have a knack for language and quickly pick them up, and this is reflected on how their language as a group evolves when in a certain region. Most Tengu communities still have a tribal sort of structure where they have very loose rules that are very subjective, and that if there's some kind of problem between Tengu, they'll have a kind of public arbitration between them. Sometimes public combat if it really draws to that. They oftentimes, though, do look to, of course, their elders, like most tribes, to see what they think about any circumstance and rely on their wisdom for guidance. Tengu as a whole tend to be neutral, though there are some Tengu that are chaotic neutral because they can't control their impulses, so it's, woo, let's do this. The religious beliefs of a Tengu tribe can vary, too. You could have a group that sticks to the old Tengu gods, though some of them have altered in their eyes and have picked up beliefs based on other religions. Some of them will worship the gods or pantheons of the area that they're in, oftentimes looking to things like human gods. The problem with Tengu is they can be very fickle when it comes to religious beliefs. If they're under a religious belief and it looks as if there's getting no benefit for following it, they can easily switch to another one. They have a fickle nature when it comes to a lot of things. That's why most Tengu actually just tend to stick to a kind of polytheism worship. They worship a whole bunch of different gods, basically upholding a tenet from a god when it seems appropriate at a time. So, I'm going to do this for this god right now because it's appropriate. This for this god because it seems appropriate. Not sticking to specific worship of one. Because their circumstances are so bad back at their homes, usually, many Tengu go out and become adventurers. Seek fame, fortune, glory in the world around them to, well, improve their standings. It's common for Tengu to kind of feel that the road itself, the travel itself, is a path to a sort of enlightenment that they can have. That they can not only find something to improve their basic life physically, but almost spiritually on the road. Some see this as spiritual empowerment. Some see this that the empowerment of the increase of the spirit is maybe their own techniques, whether that's sword art or something else, perfecting what they naturally have. So, despite prejudice that oftentimes outsiders have for Tengu, many of those Tengu adventurers actually kind of embrace the stereotypes. And the reason is this. They seek to become the epitome of all that is Tengu. Whether this is the true Tengu or not, no, it's the Tengu that people see them as, and be a shining beacon of their race, in a way. Whether that's good or bad is kind of hard to tell. Now, despite Tengu seeming frail because they are much thinner than a human, they do still tend to have used their quick abilities to become very good rogues or rangers. And since they do actually have this generalized spiritual connection, they can become great oracles too. A Tengu that tends to go into any kind of martial arts will find themselves working as mercenaries or bodyguards to people as a way to not only earn money for their art, but perhaps even practice it a little bit and increase it. Now let's talk about Tengu's racial traits. So they get greater wisdom and greater dexterity, but suffer from a frailty, lose some constitution. They have standard speed. An important note about their languages here, unlike any other race that usually has specific languages they can choose when it comes to bonus languages, Tengu can take any, since they are such gifted linguists. They get bonuses to perception and stealth. They get that bonus to linguistics, and an important note here, since we've been talking about their linguistics, every time a Tengu takes a rank in linguistics, which normally Most other races, 1 rank in linguistics means 1 language. Tengu get 2 languages. Meaning very easily, if you as a Tengu would take 20 ranks in languages, in linguistics, you would have 40 bonus languages. Beyond the 2 you start with, and beyond the bonuses you got from intelligence. That is a lot of languages Tengus can get. They are really good linguists. Now, all Tengu are trained with sword-like weapons. This means they're basically trained in such a way that any kind of sword-like item they would pick up, from a dagger to a rapier, to even some of the more exotic ones like an elven blade, they could pick it up, use it as if it was something they could do. So they are proficient in any kind of sword-like item. They also have a natural attack, a beak. They can hit people with their beak and do some damage to it. And they have, as enhanced senses, low-light vision. Now for some alternate racial traits, some Tengu have better senses that allow them to, well, smell carrion. It's particularly a scent ability that works on dead things or dying things, basically things under 50% health. Some of them get natural attacks as claws, in addition to their beaks. Others have specialty training when it comes to sword fighting. Some of them get exotic weapons that they're specially trained with, rather than just in general these swords. Some can even glide to a degree. Now this gliding often takes the form of falling slowly. They can sort of catch themselves with their feathers. But some of them can, if with a bit of maneuvering, they might be able to glide horizontally, just a little bit, so they can kind of glide down when falling instead of just fall. It works like feather fall, and they could possibly go horizontally, not just vertically. Now for favorite class options, there's 2 which stand out that I think are really interesting ones. One is for monks. They get more ki pool. They can, for every 4 levels, get 1 extra ki pool. That can be very powerful for a monk. And the other one is for a Tengu witch, actually. They can get bonus spells into their familiar. That can be very useful. Granted, being a witch, they could also then just find scrolls or other things and scribe them into it. It's not as powerful as something, say, like an oracle or sorcerer who gets bonus spells, but still, it's technically less money, less effort you have to do to get more spells into your familiar as a witch. It's still pretty good. Now, Tengu have 2 racial archetypes that they can take. One is the Swordmaster. This is in fact a Tengu archetype for rogues. They take away some of their other rogue abilities and gain basically special trances, special sword type fighting techniques that oftentimes either mimic things like style feats that a monk would take, or other various abilities to give them advantage when fighting with a sword. Basically kind of enhancing their almost spiritual connection with a blade. The other one is the Shigenjo, which is an oracle archetype for Tengu. They master the spiritual side of their connections, kind of seeking one with the celestial spirits around them. And often doing this, they kind of then match a martial prowess with their spiritual prowess. They get some bonus spells, there's some recommended mysteries you'd choose from, but the big thing here is they get a ki pool, similar to a monk, that they can use to enhance some of their oracle abilities rather than their monk abilities, and eventually learn the quivering palm ability, similar to what a monk would have. Now, Tengu have a variety of racial feats. Some of them allow them to effectively have a more deadly beak. There are those that allow them to feed on carrion, having resistances to disease and ingested poisons. Some of them allow them to transform and look themselves like a human, except with a very long nose, the size of their beak, which means you don't look human at all, really. You just look like a weird long-nosed human creature. But you could always hide that with a, let's say, mask of some kind, or some other, it's a deformity, if you got a good enough diplomacy. Some of them have a really interesting ability to, with a racial feat, of course, to basically pull off that once they should fail at something like a bluff, a intimidate, or a sleight of hand, they could use diplomacy at the same DC to pass it off of oh, it's a weird Tengu tradition. That's a really interesting one. Others eventually learn to fly a little bit per day with their kind of way they're set up to sprout some wings, or to eventually turn into a crow itself. So they have some very interesting racial feats that give them a wide variety of abilities. But that's it for today. So I introduced you to the Tengu. The Tengus are an interesting race because they've had so much tragedy, you can almost say, in their past. But in a way, they've embraced the tragedy a little bit, being kind of the hunted, pushed into servitude, slavery, pushed to the fringes of society, and made something of themselves. Granted, this something is oftentimes the stereotypes of their look at them. The scoundrels, the thieves, the cunning little people in the back alley. Well, they aren't that little, they're just hunched over. They're an interesting race with very interesting abilities, whose adventurers, again, oftentimes embrace that stereotype. Because maybe being the best Tengu, even if it's the Tengu that everybody else thinks you are, is the best way to show that my race is out there still. We aren't the fringe that you think we are, and we're not going to continue to take what you have and you're going to shove on us. We're going to be there. We're going to still be strong, no matter what happens. The Tengu are strong, because they persevere. But I hope you're having a great day. If you've played a Tengu character, let me know in the comments below. I always love to hear about the various characters you play and the various games you've played. And until the next time, I bid you farewell.